Actually, well, I had a question.
Yes.
When we put the notes on the HTMLs and the CSS, how detailed do you want it? Do you want it like, oh, this block of code at formats like this section of blah blah, or do you want it like, oh, this line specifically moves it to the left and this line specifically?
Hmm. So I think the best benchmark to use would be the code sandbox that I shared with you all. So sort of four major functions, just commenting what exactly this function does or what this certain line does if it's important. But things that are, that I'd say go beyond that example would just be, I guess, extra credit. I'd say in general, the more the merrier, but in minimum, try to keep it along the lines of what I've got in the code sandbox that I shared.
Okay. Oh, and say you do like a novel function twice. Is it okay just to label the first time and then if the code reappears again, you don't have to say the same thing?
Yeah, I would say yes. And although it's not necessarily the expectation that you write functions for everything, I would say if you do have repeated code, generally the best practice is you write a function for that code, and then that enables you to then just recall that function with a single line.
Okay.
So I'd say that's more advanced level, not necessarily the expectation. I won't ding you if you don't do a function, but that's generally best code practice. They call it DRY, or do not repeat yourself. And I'd encourage you to do that as much as possible. Okay, so I think we've got, at least for the most part, a full class. So I'll get started. And today is going to be, at least half of it will be taken up with your class presentations. And before we dive into that, I'll share a little bit of review of what's expected so that it's fresh in everyone's head. And then you all can ask any questions that you have before you actually do your presentations. And then the second half, I'll really focus on prototypes. Well, that will be the prototypes, but then also I'll focus on server-side code, give a little bit of an overview of what that means and how that would work if you wanted to explore doing more back-end coding for either your prototype or something else in the future. So for the final projects, here are the expectations with the actual code. So for the content, I'm going to be asking the question to myself as I grade: would a new user understand the purpose of the prototype without any guidance? For design, does it follow design principles from lecture 2? So I won't make a judgment on whether I think a particular site is beautiful or ugly, but just as long as you're following some general principles. And nothing too garish. And then inputs, outputs. Does the prototype take inputs from the user and then transform them into outputs that actually address whatever that user story is? So are you doing something with those inputs that really help the user in a way that you all originally identified was important for fulfilling that user story? Data visuals, just is there any data visualization used on the site? And then finally commenting. That'll be due Wednesday. So Wednesday at around 5, I'll go in and look at all the code, just see how neat it looks in general. So it's not just commenting, also just, is everything indented properly? Does it look good? Any questions on the code? Okay, so then presentation, it'll be a 15 to 20 minute presentation and then Q&A from me and the rest of the audience. And here I'm looking for, with regard to user story, did the team describe the user story in detail and explain how exactly their prototype is satisfying the user's needs? So that's really the thing that I most care about is, are you satisfying your user story? And then roles, did each team member explain what they did and why? So for the presentations, I'd like one person to share their screen so that they can really drive the visual that everyone's seeing. But I'd like everyone to participate, at least insofar as they say what they did and why they chose the route that they chose, whether that be with design or the function, the JavaScript that they used, etc. Methodology, so I'd like you to talk very briefly, but a little bit about whether you followed the Agile methodology, if so, how you followed it, what you found to be most valuable, what you found to be confusing. I'd be interested just to hear the overall story of how the project went from a project management perspective. And then user testing. So did you explain how you were able to use the user testing to improve your prototype? Because obviously as a component of Agile, getting that user interface and having them tell you what you need to build next is incredibly important. So any questions on that? If not, we'll dive into the presentations. Okay, so I did a random order for the presentations, and we have first up is disconnect. So I will allow you all to share. I think I have to stop mine first. Okay, so whoever from disconnect wants to share, you should be able to now.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, can everyone else see their screen? All right, looks like you're good.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and start us off. So hi everyone, our app name is Disconnect. So our team members include Madeline, Nia, and myself, Sumitha. So what we wanted to do was we created a place for people with rare diseases to become connected. Within this app, people with rare diseases have the opportunity to find their own community, share stories with one another, and have easy access to resources. So now we're going to walk you through the app. So as you can see, this is our home screen here. As you can see, we have the picture of the world. Why, you may ask? We decided to have this as our background because it symbolizes global connection. So our user story is that there is an individual who wants to connect with some people who may better understand what it might be like to live with a certain rare disease than those in their current community. It is important for them to be able to share their journey with people who can make them feel less alone. So with having access to an app like this, based on their preferences, they are able to find peace of mind, knowing they have a support group of people who are there for them. So now I'm gonna hand it off to Nia, who's gonna take us through the next step.
All right, so here we have the sign up page. The user would enter their information here, and then they'd click submit. So the next thing that we have here is a questionnaire. There's 6 different questions to try and get to know the user a little bit better. So this is kind of intended for 3 different kinds of people: the patient, which is the person suffering from the disease, a parent or guardian, or a partner. So on this next page, we ask them what they're looking for, if they're looking for specifically an online community, resources for their diseases, and advice. And then we give them the option to list other, just so we can kind of collect that information and kind of use that to improve our site as we continue on. So here we ask them which category their disease would fall into. We felt like this was a good way to ask the user about their disease without getting too specific, so that way they might not be as hesitant to give us that information, because I know that like a lot of times they might want to know what you're going to do with that, especially when it's in regard to health information. So we kind of want to make that general. On this next one, we ask about the age group of the patient. So if you're a parent or a partner or whatever, we want to know about the specific person who would be having the disease. So that way we can kind of tailor your site user experience to help you with that. So here we have gender identity. There's different options for you to select. And then we ask for your zip code. This helps us to be able to put you in an area with people who are close to you for things that you might be interested in, like activities, for example. So here we are. So next I'll hand it off to Madeline.
Thank you. So here's our newsfeed. So when the user goes ahead and inputs their information, takes them straight to this page, and then it just shows you like update, like one can also post videos and they're able to interact with one another. So the last one we did input just the videos so you guys can know that it's available. And then if you go ahead and click to my profile, so once the user goes ahead and clicks the user profile, they're able to go ahead and click edit. So when they go ahead and do that, they can just input their information, any like changes they need to address, they can go ahead and do that. Once they're done, we go ahead and click save, and it just saves their information. And then the next one will be messages. So for the messages, we decided to input this page just for like an easy resource for the user. So this is like just a private messenger area where people can go ahead and talk with others. It's a chance for them to be able to like connect on like a more deeper level, and it's private as well. And I'm gonna go ahead and hand it on to Sunita.
Okay, so now if you don't mind hitting the home page. So now we're gonna go ahead and take you to groups. So having a groups page for our users was important so they can have like a fun interactive way of finding like certain maybe like things that they want to do with other people within this app. So here we have 2 groups just as like an idea. And so this gives them really a reason to connect and like find people who they want to hang out with and like have the chance to like make new friends. So if you want to go ahead and click on the join club for, so once you join a club, it takes you to a page with like a calendar and such that gives you the days that they meet, and then it just allows them to like have like a more private area for them to like discuss things with each other, and like maybe if they need to change the dates around for like meetups. You can go ahead and hit home again. And the next area that we have is stories. So within stories, this is a chance for the users to really share really stories of themselves, of what makes them unique and like stuff that they've been maybe struggling with growing up with like a rare disease. And it gives them a chance to like interact with other people to see if like other people as well are suffering from something similar, and they can also have similarities within their stories. So we have created an area for them as well to be able to do that. And now I'll hand it over to Nia.
All right, so here in this drop-down menu, we also have access to disease resources and frequently asked questions. So in the disease resources area, this is really to give them options of what they might be looking for in terms of resources, and then for who specifically they might be. So if they're a patient, a parent, or a partner of somebody with the rare disease. So if, for example, somebody wanted financial support for a patient, they get results like this, things that are accepting applications, for specific diseases. Now, on the next thing we have the FAQs page, and oh my God, I'm sorry. It doesn't want to work sometimes, but here we go. All right, there we go. So in the frequently asked questions page, we have questions that were frequently asked. We kind of looked this up to see what the most common questions were, and different kind of answers we'd have for those questions that people might want to know. Now, some additional features we just thought were good to have were a search bar here that they can use to search Google or our website in specific that they might be looking for. On our alerts, we also have this pop-up, and if they had just come here, it'd be like, go finish your profile. They could click on go, and it would take them to the My Profile page. And that's everything. So when they're done, they just get to log out, and it takes them back to here.
Great, it's a beautiful site. Could you talk a little bit to the, I guess, Agile methodology and then user testing? So a little bit about the process of how you use those to get to where you are right now.
I guess I can talk a little bit about user testing. It was definitely very helpful, I think, for us, because as you can see, based on the last time we showed you guys our site versus now, it looks a lot different. And that was based on the user feedback, particularly if, like the color scheme, they didn't like it. So we decided to change it, make it more updated to kind of match more of what we wanted to do with our social media sites. We got things like it looked a lot like Facebook. It reminded them of hospital-like colors, so we wanted to try and make it more vibrant and interesting to the user. It also was really helpful in terms of features, because a lot of times, like, we had some things that weren't completely done and they didn't work. So we did make sure to fix those before we had the site finished here for you guys. Yeah, that's at least my experience for the user experience.
I can go ahead and touch base on the Agile methodology. So I believe this means through like the Scrum docs and stuff and like splitting the work.
Exactly.
But as far as like splitting the work goes, we went in with like having like kind of like a foundation of like who was doing what, but as we went through it, we realized like all of us were just kind of helping each other out with like various pages. And if like, let's say like I was having trouble with something, Nia or Natalie would step in. Like we, even on our Scrum doc, it would say like a lot of times like, okay, like this person was going to work on it. But what ended up happening was that like all of us ended up helping each other out, because coding is difficult and it takes a lot of trial and error, as we saw in these last couple of weeks. So a lot of things that we had tried just didn't work. And sometimes it's just another person seeing maybe you miss like one simple div and then the whole thing comes through. So that's kind of like what we did. And like, we were pretty like good about keeping like a pretty organized Scrum doc, but in the end it got kind of disorganized. But I think like all of us had like a good understanding of what needed to be done, and we were constantly communicating with each other.
Yeah, very cool. It sounds like you all definitely had a T-shaped team in that sense. Everyone was helping each other out. And as you said, fresh eyes can be the most important attribute when looking over code. It's just someone who hasn't been nose deep into the code all day.
Yeah, I think touching up on that, getting that user feedback was very valuable, because we were able to come together as a group and then just make those changes at very like short time frame.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And could you talk a little bit to, I guess you touched upon a little bit that everyone was helping each other out, but anything else in terms of roles, like, did you have any divvying up of ownership? Did someone take over one aspect over another in the site?
Yeah, we definitely
Go ahead.
Going on, we kind of had assigned that based on each page that we were doing. And as we got more involved with more and more pages, it was a lot easier to kind of split up those responsibilities to get more things done at the same time.
Okay, great. And could you talk a little bit to how you integrated JavaScript? I think I saw some signs of JavaScript being used, but I'd be interested if you could show the class maybe a little bit of where you used it and how much, or if you had any difficulty implementing it.
So with JavaScript on the stories, I actually implemented it so they can actually write something in that text box. And so like, let's say Nia writes like a little message and she actually sends it, it'll actually post.
Oh, cool.
But the issue with this is, and I think you said to touch base on the difficulties we had, right? Okay, so I couldn't figure out how to post it in like the same format as I had like the 3 stories. So it would post, but then it wouldn't like go into like the same, like, I guess, styling, like the CSS and such. And then when you refresh the page, it goes away. But
and that makes sense, because I think when you refresh, everything sort of gets cleared by the code sandbox.
yeah. So this Java took quite a bit of time. Java is not something that like all of us as a group, we had great difficulty with, just because for some reason it just really wouldn't work out. But luckily I was able to get this story box to work, so that was nice.
Yeah, it looks really nice. Okay, anyone else have any questions or comments?
I have a question. So at the beginning you said that like your quiz was going to say like, what does your disease fall under? Is that possible to like click more than one for patients who might have multiple things, or is it like a only select one?
No, it is a multiple select. I went through it kind of quickly, but it had like hold down the control and then you'd be able to select multiple.
Okay.
Anyone else? Okay, well, I think you all did a great job. I think this is a very slick looking site. I think it's really cool that you were able to turn it into something this good looking just using code, right? It looks like that you would create on a professional site making thing like Wix or WordPress, except it's your own code, which I think is really cool to see, you know, given where you all were entering into this in terms of coding experience. I would say the only feedback that I'd offer on the other end is just, I think that the posting of the stories would have been really cool to see implemented. And I would have encouraged you to just send me some questions and I could have helped you out a little bit on that. I think you were probably like 90% of the way there. I think the hardest part is getting the stories on there, and then the formatting is just like a little thing at the end. So I would have encouraged you to do that. But I do think overall the site looks really cool, and it's very easy to see how this would fulfill the needs of a particular user. I guess one last question. If you look, just going back on the whole experience, what would you say would be your favorite, and maybe you could each go on this, what would you say is your favorite part about coding and your least favorite, and then is this something that you think you'd pursue outside of this class?
I guess I can go first. I think my favorite part is just being able to see like the words come to life. Like when you change little things, how much big change happens on your page. And then for me, I definitely like this a lot. It was frustrating a lot of the time, but I think it's a lot of fun for me to just be able to like create products like this. So
Yeah.
I
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely keep using this. I feel like this is the first time I do coding, so it's definitely new for me. The least thing I like probably Java. Java was like the most complicated portion of it. But I do like just when Nia just said coming everything to life, and like just one little thing like not putting like quotations can like make a difference, and like it can change everything. And then yeah, I really enjoyed doing this.
Great.
Kind of going off of what like Madeline and Nia said, like I enjoyed this experience. It was very difficult. Um, it was really interesting to see like how you start off with like a blank surface completely and like what it can become was like really cool, and just to see that all the amazing tools that you could use to get here with like just simply using like code. Something that like I agree with Natalie on that was really difficult was Java. I just feel like my mind just could not grasp how to like use it, and really it was very frustrating.
Yeah.
But I think like I would use this, but maybe like I need a break from it though.
Area. Yeah, I think with coding, it's does the joy that you get from getting everything together and then sort of seeing it work out outweigh the frustration when you're looking for that semicolon or the missing div or something like that, because there's a lot of tedium, but then at the end of the day, you're building something, which is pretty cool. So I hope you all continue to explore this. I think my goal here was to make sure that you could build something like this if you saw a need in whatever line of work you end up going into. And so I hope now you're empowered so that maybe after your long break, you feel inspired to build something in the future. Thanks so much. Great job.
Thank you.
Okay, so if you could stop sharing, and then next up would be inform me.
Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay.
So I'll start us off to kind of give a reminder and background about Inform Me and the user story about it. So Inform Me is basically kind of a video streaming website where individuals, after they've received some kind of like diagnosis or told that they have to do some kind of test, they can access this site and start accessing videos relating to their diagnosis or just things that they need more information on. And it kind of is meant to support and empower the individual. So they can join a support group to interact with other individuals who might have a similar diagnosis, or they can feel empowered to ask more questions, contact doctors, or even request for like a new video. So the user story was, very briefly, it was just kind of that the user would receive a diagnosis and it's possible that the physician rushed the appointment. So they decide to go on Inform Me to learn a little bit more about it. So they search up the disease, condition, or topic of choice, and they review a video from a board certified physician in a specific specialty. And then they should become better informed on the topic, and now they can go to their next appointment a little bit more confident and even join support groups as they go through this new time in their life.
Exactly. So like Monica was saying, the whole idea behind this entire site was that it was just very streamlined, very easy to use, especially since there's a very wide variety of ages that are going to be using this and a wide variety of demographics. So all they have to do in order to use this site is they do have to create an account, but once they log in, Kelsey, if you could just click submit.
First, I'm going to show off, we used a little bit of JavaScript in here. So if you insert the wrong username or password, you will get an alert saying it's incorrect. And so you can do that. But
Cool. All right. So that is true. And thank you. I forgot to mention that. So you will get an alert saying that you've logged in successfully. And once you have logged in successfully, this is the landing page that you'll come to. Basically, we tried to keep this as simple as possible. So just a little brief summary about what Inform Me is as a company, as well as
Your microphone is acting up.
oh, okay.
You were good until like 10 seconds ago.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. So like I was saying, the landing page that you come to is just a very, very brief summary about what Inform Me is as a company, as well as, like Monica was mentioning earlier, what the inspiration behind it was, as well as that need that we're trying to fulfill as a mission. And then just a little icing on the cake, you actually get to kind of semi-meet the team virtually as well. But once that has all been said and done and has been taken care of, then you can actually start getting down to brass tacks. So the nav bar that we made up at the top is also designed to be very simple, very easy to use. And of course, being a video sharing site, one of the most important tabs that you could click on is the video site. And I'm going to let Samantha take it from there.
So we kind of categorize the videos based off their condition. So we have acne, rheumatoid arthritis, and then PCOS. So for acne, if you want to learn more about it, there's a link at the bottom. So click that. The patient or the person's able to save the video for later, which will go to their profile page, and Kelsey will talk about later. But they're also allowed to comment on the video, which
Cool.
you can also reply or like other comments as well. But, or if Kelsey wants to show that off too. If you go to support groups, Kelsey will talk more about that.
okay, so the other big thing that we wanted to do aside from the videos was the support group. So we put a little disclaimer up here as well, just for this of these are run by people, not by doctors. So anything said on here is people who are going through a similar thing as you, but it shouldn't be taken in place of your doctor's advice. But right now there's a support group for each type of video that's up. So we have the acne, the rheumatoid arthritis, and the PCOS support groups. We had a little technical difficulty on getting those, actually like the link to it, but it would be like a blog post where you can join the support group, and people who have a similar thing like you can talk about maybe like a new medication or a new video that they found, and they can share those videos and you can see what others have found and get more information on it, as well as it would link to the videos that are already on the site about that condition. And then we also have our doctors on here. So Monica's gonna tell you a bit about that.
So yeah, so I don't know about you guys, but I always research my doctors before I have an appointment with them. So that's kind of the goal of this part of the site, where the individual will get to look up the doctor, kind of get an idea of what their specialty is, where they studied, all that kind of stuff. So here I have some sample doctors, the top of their field. So if we click on more about Dr. Gray, we get an idea of what her accomplishments are, where she did her residency, where she went to medical school, and then it would be linked to various videos by that doctor, kind of like here. So yeah, and then we'll go on to the profile page, which Kelsey will go on to talk about.
So we wanted to also have a place where all of this is stored and it's individualized for each patient or user on this. So at the top is their information, and they can change it if it's ever needed. And their location is really just used for if they're looking up doctors in their area or something like that, then it can filter those out, but none of this is shared with anything else. And then notifications. So when they join a support group or they start following certain doctors, they'll get notified when they have posted a new video or there's new comments in the support group. Also, their saved videos that Sam showed earlier will be in here. So they'll link to this and you can go back and watch those videos again. In addition, the recently viewed doctors, but there's also 2 forms that we wanted to have to make this more personalized to the user so that we can get what they're looking for and make sure it's on our site. One of those is a make a request. So they can come on here and they can say the field or condition that they're wanting to see a video about, and maybe specific topics in that field, and any other additional questions or comments that they have. They also can request a support group for that field in those comments and stuff as well. And as well as volunteer. So doctors can also sign up for this site as volunteers. And this is where they can come and say what they are, what they specialize in, and what they're willing to volunteer their time to do, whether it be make videos, answer comments on videos, or privately asked questions that people might have on the site. And we can verify that they are qualified to do this. And then as those requests come in, we can send it to them so that they are getting done by professionals and we're getting the best information that we can back to our people. And then when it's all said and done, all they will have to do is log out, and it'll let them know that they've successfully logged out and everything. So yeah, that's our site.
Great, thanks so much. Could you all talk a little bit to how the Scrum and Agile methodology worked out, and then what your roles were within the team?
So yeah, so we started off kind of dividing it up on who's going to focus on what page. And as the assignment kind of progressed, we started just helping each other out more. So if one person was struggling with certain coding, somebody else would kind of step in. If somebody had an idea of how to improve something, we would all kind of help each other out. So our Scrum docs, we tried to keep it updated, especially towards the end. We really tried to organize everything by who did what, but it was very intertwined because we did meet up every week and, help each other out like that.
Great. Was someone else gonna add?
I was just gonna add to that. Like, I agree with like what Monica was saying. Like, it was very like working together. Especially like if one person got one thing working on a certain page, it would be like, okay, you take that and put it on this page too. Like, this way we can make sure everything's going right. So there was a lot of like sharing things across things as certain pages got done. So it was nice.
And I think that really speaks to some of the differences between Agile methodology and that old waterfall method that I showed you all before introducing before introducing Agile. With waterfall, you have your different departments that really stick with what they do, and they just get a project incoming, they add the JavaScript, wherever that might be, and then hand it off. And you don't have that interaction. And I'm sure you all saw firsthand how having that team interaction really helped with building that final project, and also adding consistency into the page, like you were just mentioning. And then how about testing? Anyone want to speak to the user testing?
The testers did not hold back on
Mm-hmm.
how our website looked. I asked my parents, and that was a little harsh, but it's okay. It looks better now. Mostly they kind of they had a lot of comments that we implemented, more like the color scheme, and then like how they kind of like wanted or would expect something to look like. So like for a homepage, they're like, initially it was bare when we tested them, but they're like, but we've added a ton of stuff.
Yeah.
We also like, initially our log out page also had like log in stuff. So we separated our log out and log in, which was a lot better. It makes more sense now, as well as like kind of like the words that were displayed on the screen. Initially it would say like your blah, 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 when it should say like my something. So it's like the wordings are what they really looked at rather than all the other stuff.
Gotcha. And I know you all interacted with me a decent amount to troubleshoot some JavaScript, which is a good thing. Could you talk a little bit to that? Maybe what were some of the struggles you had, and then how you ended up coming to a point where you had something that you really liked on the functional end?
Well, for our login, we wanted it to be like taking their input and like saying if they did it right or wrong. So when we did it, it would send you alert. But the hard part was like, I'm used to C, so like you don't need to focus on like indenting.
Mm-hmm.
And so I figured out the hard way that it's really important to indent stuff. And then it finally worked, which I'm really happy about. So that's good.
I will say we had about 3 different JavaScripts trying to work at the same time. It was just like, which one's gonna work out first? Because it was like in different capacities of how can we make this work? How can we make this work? Because we were having those issues, but it was really satisfying when we finally got it done.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you mentioned, Samantha, about the knowing C, I think it's funny how sometimes knowing a language can be helpful because you have that background and it's less intimidating, but it also can throw you off if maybe they're similar, but then there's differences in subtle ways that can definitely make you overlook things or put something in that doesn't need to be there. So I think that's definitely interesting to see how that played out with you all. And then if you all could just speak individually to sort of what did you enjoy about coding, what did you not enjoy, what was frustrating, and then do you think this will be something you'll pursue after the class?
So I can, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Sam, but in terms of enjoying this, I definitely thought it was an interesting process, and like has been said before, I definitely enjoyed the final result and what came of it. That being said, the tedium was, no offense, but unlike anything I have ever experienced in my life.
Mm-hmm.
So would I use this again? on a daily basis or on a regular basis, probably not. But as far as just kind of having a tool in my back pocket, I'm definitely glad that I have it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I hear you on the tedium. Me too. I think it's all about is the tedium outweighed by, you know, I guess the joy in building it, but it's definitely tedious, and you sometimes want to pull your hair out, and especially when you find the solution, you figure out that it's something silly, and sometimes you wasted the whole day working on it. All right, who else?
So building off of that, I also like that, like, just like the Disconnect team was mentioning, it was really cool to see like what your ideas were coming to life, like visually, especially because like sometimes you look at a website, you see a bunch of code, and like off the bat, you're like, oh my God, that's so much. So it was cool to be able to do that. It definitely was really, really frustrating at times. Today with the technical complication was definitely super frustrating. But in the end, it is satisfying to see like the things that you want happen in front of you and like update in real time and everything. Yeah. Oh, and if I'll use it again in the future, I forgot about that. I think, yeah, I think like say when I'm a doctor one day, hopefully, like if I wanted to make a website for my office or whatever, at least I know that I have these skills in my back pocket and I can utilize them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So one of my favorite things was actually kind of getting to see how you can manipulate it based on screens. So like something else I incorporated was like the nav bar will get bigger and smaller with the sizing of the pages. And so the text will actually get bigger and stuff. So seeing all that like come together and actually work was really cool for me. But it is like a lot. So as much as I enjoyed it, it definitely frustrated me. And similar to Sam, like I have coding background, but most of it's backend. So this was very different. So it was a big change. As far as like using it again in the future, it's good to know I could if I had to, but I would not want to do it by myself. I think I would stick to more just the back end stuff unless somebody came to me and was like, we need your input. Like, but I would probably try to not do a whole website again, but I could put some input in there at least.
Absolutely, yeah. And one thing I would actually add, just based on my own career experience, is I worked in operations for 7 years, and we were implementing a electronic batch record system. So we were going from paper to electronic, and just having the coding background, even though I wasn't doing any coding myself, gave me a sense for what was doable and when the other team was sandbagging versus when they actually were running into problems that we had to help them out on. And so it does help because it's almost like when you take your car to the mechanic, if you don't know how the car works, they can tell you anything. And it goes the same way with computer programming.
I guess I'm the last one. I enjoyed seeing it work, like, and the final product. I'm really happy how it turned out. What frustrated me is JavaScript. I'm not really a fan, but I'm a fan of all the other languages, so we're good. I will have someone else do the JavaScript. As for in the future, I'm glad I know this now. I can say I know like 3 more languages, even though I'm not very good at them, but it's still like a good thing. Yeah.
Yeah, put it on your resume. It looks good on your resume to say that you know HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And then if it turns out they're needed in the role, then just study up again. And hopefully you'll be at a point where it'll come back to you quickly. Okay. Anyone else have any questions for the Informe team? All right, well, thank you very much. Next up is, look, my practice.
All right, can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, hey guys, we are My Practice. Just to give you a little background on what we did. So My Practice is a mobile project management tool to essentially help doctors who run a solo practice to help streamline their scheduling pretty much on the go. So it's a mobile app to help them do that. So the prototype that we made is pretty much anchored to the main user story, which is essentially doctors want to organize and automate their scheduling, so they can spend more time on things that require more of their attention. So let's take a quick tour on this. Let's go and log in. So here's the home page. You'll see 3 different segments here. One, they can see their patients. And then here they'll see their staff, and then here they'll see their daily schedule. So if you look into patients, here we have 2, for example. This guy, Benjamin Davis, the doctor wants to see their profile. They can click that. They see their age, phone number. Here they would see their summary and their appointments if they have any. And then same thing with the staff. These are, for example, like nurses. Same setup here. So let's say the user wants to schedule an appointment on behalf of the doctor for a patient. They would go to schedule. Oh, we logged out. We go to view schedule. And let's say they want to do a patient schedule. And then here's it's like a bootstrap that we got from Calendly, I think, yeah. So this is backed by JavaScript. So you can click on the day, confirm it, and then you can put the any details about the appointment there. So that's pretty much a brief tour for My Practice. I'll hand it over to Robin to talk more in detail.
Thank you. So here we are at a home page. As you can see, there's a username. Can you go back?
Yeah.
So like after the user input their username and password, they can click login. But if they lost your password, they can click the link lost your password. And then that will direct them to a page where they enter their email. And then the system will just send a link to the user's email address, and then they can reset their password. And after that, they can click back. And if they want to create a new account, they can click create new account. And yeah, and then they can register using their email, and then the system will send a link to their email address, and then for them to create a account. And then after that, you can go back. And as you can see here, when the user is clicking on the buttons, the color will change, which is like another way to tell the user that they're clicking the right buttons. And after they log in, they can go to the home page, and then Derek will talk about the home page.
Cool. So for the homepage, a lot of the interviews that we got that weren't about our lack of content on the website yet revolved around continuity and ease of maneuvering through the website. So trying to make it basically as simple as how we had it in the wireframe. That way it's just more intuitive and user-friendly. So for example, the color scheme was reflective of just a simple blue and orange, but then having these 3 different options for the main purposes of the website, especially in different colors, kind of just highlights how easy and simple it is, especially with the white background going on. So our main story wanted to go through how a doctor would set up a schedule for a patient, but then we didn't want to leave the rest of the website bare bones. So when we do the view patients and view staff, we kind of put in dummy data as in where this site can go off next. So kind of making profiles for both the patients and the staffs and including code for those summaries. And what's nice too is that the nav bar that we implemented kind of helps keep that user-friendly continuity because you don't have to struggle with, oh, I have to go back the same direction I came in. Rather, if you halfway through want to, instead of look at your patients, you want to look at your staff, you have that easy option. But then all the buttons below also have that option. So like when Mo visited Benjamin Davis's profile, so if you click to go to profile, the back to patients option would be there, but the nav bar holds sticky. That way you can just go straight to like save schedule and stuff like that. So then I'll have Tuzo talk about the schedules page.
Okay, so can somebody help me? Okay. So in the term of the schedule, we wanted something that will be like easy and give much more information to the patient or to the doctor. So for example, when a patient goes to the patient schedule, the standard time we set for it, like the time will vary depending on different time of appointment a person may want. So for us, we set like a standard meeting of 30 minutes. And as we look for the date and the time, you may click any dates and then select any time from 9 until 4 to see which time will be available to you. And then, for example, when you confirm it, it leads you to what's your name, asks for your email, and if maybe you will be accompanied with anybody, you will be able to add guest, and the guest also, they'll be sent the email in order to get the notifications. But also if you have something to address beforehand for the meeting, you can be able, and then you schedule the meeting, and the meeting will give you the reminder later. So that works for both the staff, the patients together, and the personal schedule. So right now I'll hand back to Mo to speak more about other things.
And I think, yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Could you talk a little bit about the Scrum and how that went and how you ended up defining roles for your team? Who worked on what?
Yeah. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it was kind of the same as the other two groups where everyone was assigned either kind of an HTML or a CSS role, but at the end of the day, it kind of integrated into one cohesive group. So rather, the Scrum doc and assigning things just came down to, it was like, I'm trying to figure out the word, but who was responsible in the end. So they had like the oversight just to confirm that this thing actually came through and it was accomplished. So Robin and Tuzo were more in charge of the HTML and the JavaScript, while me and Mo were more in charge of the CSS and kind of editing the HTML and as it went, that way we can accompany that CSS. So it was kind of just integrated back and forth. Mm-hmm. And then I know you're gonna ask about the user interviews or user stories. Sorry, was it the user testing? And it kind of was rough because during the time of the user testing, we were having issues with code sandbox on saving. So there was an issue where we would save a code and then we'd close it and then we'd open up the same link and then the code would be gone. And then we had issues of sharing code in between each other. So Code Sandbox, just the platform itself, turned out to be a little difficult for us to be on the same page. So within our user testing, it was kind of, it had the flow, but then a lot of our comments were just, oh, it's kind of empty. But the comments that weren't, oh, it's empty, were more on just how they liked that it was user friendly and to just keep it simple that way. That way navigation wouldn't be an issue. So when content does get there, it's easy to find. So a lot of the design and moving forward with like the user testing and the comments just came on how can we keep the site streamlined, like Mo said. You just want to keep it simple. You want to get to point A to point B without too much distractions or too much confusion how to get there. So that was kind of how we moved forward with the layout, I guess, of the code and just the user story and things like that.
Okay, great. So I think the most interesting feature, the core feature here is the scheduling. So could you all walk through a little bit about how that worked? I know you used a plugin for that. So how did that go? Was it difficult to implement? Did you have to, I guess, customize it at all for your platform? This could go to anyone on the team.
I can speak for that. For the case of the scheduling, first of all, we had like 3 options, and we wanted to see which will be the easy for the users and us too. The first one was we worked by creating our own calendar, by writing the whole JavaScript, putting the dates, putting the exceptions and everything. And then we thought that it needs more and more things that we sometimes don't have experience with. So we go to the second option, which was using the iframe from the Google Calendar, but that would only be visible to the person sending to, but won't be visible for the one you're scheduling. So we thought that the easy way to do is we should ask for the plugin. So that's why we embedded the calendar in Widgate, which will be easy to schedule, but also we can create a little bit of the database to store the information for that.
And did you have to do any work to customize it for your site, or was it pretty easy to implement as well?
For the case, we just customized the simple things like the scheduling, the heights, I mean, the appearance and the fitting on the website. Yeah.
Okay, great. Does anyone have any questions for my practice team? Okay, why don't we go through each team member and talk a little bit about, what were your favorite parts about coding? What were some of the frustrations? And then do you think this is something that you would use in the future?
I guess I'll start. My favorite part about coding is just the logic that goes with it. Like after doing the Code Academy, you kind of get an idea of how to do things. So you try to apply your own logic and turn it into code, and you see the end result, which is nice. Frustrating parts is maybe that I didn't know everything about maybe CSS or HTML because I wanted to do something specifically. I just didn't know the code for it. So you have to go and Google it and find out. So it's like a lot of trial and error just to do that thing that you want to do. Let's see. And then maybe like outside of this class, and yeah, I probably would. That's why I took this class. So I feel like maybe if I had the opportunity to make an app, I have the capability to do so. So yeah, maybe in the future.
Great.
I can go next. I think for me, it's just satisfying taking something that's inside your head, an idea, and just seeing it unfold in front of you. Kind of like, when you like make art or music and stuff like that, you have this concept and then you put it out there. This entire time I was thinking about in undergrad, I took this coding class and I barely passed and I had no idea what was going on. I got nothing from it. But then in this class, I feel like I gained so much more than what I had learned in undergrad, that I feel like in the future, if I want to like make a website or have something that I want to like put in my skills box and like be able to be a part of, that this is something that I'm going to carry on into the future. So, but the only thing that really frustrated me was Code Sandbox. Did you remember the emails that we sent talking about just the issues with the saving? So if I were to code again, probably on a different platform or something like that. But yeah, I think it was worthwhile.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think that the main goal is so that when you're learning these concepts, you can actually turn it into a product that you can be proud of, like you said, like making a song or a video or something. And I think that really helps hit home some of the concepts that you end up learning. So I hope it was a good learning experience in that sense. Okay, Robin or Sapuni?
I can go first. So the thing I liked about this class is that like coding, like it has the logic in it, like Mohammed's mentioned before. So it's really satisfying to see like your code can turn into something. I took Python in undergrad, and then all we did is just like use the basic function, and then we didn't do anything. We just learned how the code works. And then like at the end of that class, I only know like how to use the language, even also because I only took one class about that. But the frustrating part of like coding is that sometimes I will have like those typo and then I didn't notice it. And then I was just wondering like, why isn't my code working and stuff? Like I will miss some tiny details. So that's like the frustrating part. But overall, it's like a fun experience. And then if I'm going to build like a website in the future, I think I will use those skills I learned in this class.
Great.
Okay, so for me, the big thing was like working on the calendar. I have a little bit knowledge of like different kind of languages, PHP and what, so I was confused which language will be the easy way to create something that I really wanted for it to be implemented. So I started using my own brain to start from scratch, and then I saw that I'm gonna burn out. So I started inspecting. I inspect many of the codes that were written. That's why I saw even the Google one. I saw different kind of website and then I inspected. So it was challenging, but also it gives me addition of the knowledges. But also I saw that there is a good thing to do when you're creating an app is making it simple. So it can be easy for you to change something, or also easy for the users also to achieve it. Because sometimes like you may want to put something which you believe that would be great for you as a code, but for the users to be very difficult to implement for it. For the case of using outside, I think I've already started my own program. I'm creating separately. So I think maybe if I finish it, I'll share with people to see how it works.
Yeah, absolutely. Send me an email. I'd be interested to look it over and help you out. I can also help you set it up because I imagine, I don't know if you're building it on code sandbox, but if you want to build on a more robust platform for long term, I can help you with that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much, team. Anyone else have any questions before we move on to the next? All right, then my health.
Hi guys, my name is Nurali, and we are team 4, My Health. And so we basically just wanted to create a website or more like an app for users who are looking to lose weight. And with social media today, I mean, we have different platforms, but there's nothing that's like strategically directs or targets just a weight loss group. And with this app, like we want them to be able to share their journey with their friends, family, and like their mutual connections and their providers, so like their physicians. And we also wanted the app to have like tools so users can actually upload, you know, new recipes that they're learning or new workouts that they're learning on their journey, and that they think that it can help, you know, other users. So they're able to add these things to their profile, and they're also able to like navigate through and, you know, look at new things that other users are uploading. And this is all done by putting in like their workout and meal preferences. But I'll let Alvin get into that. He's going to kind of direct you towards the login page and stuff. So I'll give him the platform.
So at first hand, you're greeted with kind of the login page. And with this, I kind of also, besides just logging in, I kind of also wanted to include just kind of what some of the goals of and the takeaways from the website are, just kind of what Nurali had mentioned earlier. So it kind of included this lifestyle toolbar where you can kind of click on it and kind of get an overview of what basically this website would be helping anyone with. And so with that, you have 2 options to log in. You can either log in using social media, so like Facebook or Twitter or Google Plus, or you could just log in manually. And So once you log in, you're kind of greeted with the profile page, and Raleigh will kind of go over what this entails.
All right, so as Alvin mentioned, as soon as you log in, we wanted our users to see their dashboard, which is their profile page. So the top half of the profile page is the user dashboard, like we like to call it. You'll see a display of their number of connections. So these are all the people that they're connected with on their profile. And it also displays a goal weight. Now, the entire purpose of having this app is being able to have some kind of accountability with your connections. So they are able to see your progress throughout your journey. And also, we want it to be like a lifestyle change that's implemented for long-term purposes, not just a weight loss journey. And then you can also see like there is a calorie burn dashboard where you can, don't know what's going on, but basically as you burn calories, you'll input it on the progress page, and from there, it'll begin tallying up. So if you burn, 200 calories today, it'll tally up to the 4901. So you'll have an overall calories burned on your journey. And you can also see like there is a button for recent interactions, and that'll basically just tell you, what's going on, what you've missed since the last time you've logged on. There's also an option to see your event messages, and also like your user uploads and things like that, and all the other activities. And when you scroll down, you have the ability to post statuses, and people are also have the ability to post on your wall. So if you scroll down, like you'll see, people are posting on the wall, like, hey, I used your workouts. They're really good, like keep them coming, and people share recipes on our wall. And these are all things that you can like and comment as a user. And Alvin's gonna go into the rest of the profile page.
So kind of looking to the left and right columns, we kind of wanted to also add some additional features such as like groups, events, and photos. So it kind of compiles these three things for a more user-friendly experience. So any groups that the user may be part of would be in my group. So for example, like if they have a collective goal of simple meals, maybe the user is interested in other groups and sharing ideas and receiving ideas from other members of the group. That's where you would find that. Other events, and then also a tab for her photos that you could click on, and you would have a kind of photo grid of those. The next thing would be an interest. So basically this user specifically is, her interests are having low calorie and simple meals, as well as yoga and CrossFitness. So this would be tied into the rest of her user profile. We'll go into more depth later, but basically like her explore page, her connections page would all be surrounded based on her interests that she inputs here. So she would be greeted with posts and connections that other people also share similar interests with. And then on the right-hand side, we have a column for upcoming events as well as friend requests. And then moving on to the connections page, Nirali will go over this.
Right, so the connections page is basically, we just kind of wanted to show you like a visual example of this. We just pull this information from like the 2,000 connections she had. Her connections will all be over here. And it basically gives you like other users' profile page, profile picture, and then like their email address, their current location, their career, like what they're doing, their work experience, and things of that nature. And the reason why I wanted to display this is because when you're looking at different connections, I think you really want to see what they have for themselves. Like, so you see, this Jane Doe is an internal medicine doctor, so you may want some tips, and you may want to talk to her and see what lifestyle changes you can implement in your life. And you can always reach out to her. And then if you scroll down, there's also a trainer. This trainer could be, someone who uploads videos and like pictures of what people could do, especially in times of quarantine, and how you can work out at home. So just a way to show, what connections the user has. And it also shows the connections, like their preferences. So they're like their favorite physical activities and their meal preferences. So you can see and match up how alike they are to yours, and if they're actually a connection that you want. And then Alvin is going to go over the explore page.
So the explore page is kind of our goal for this page was kind of like, for example, like how Instagram has explore page, and based on the posts that you like, the posts that you share, you kind of get you kind of get greeted with other posts that are similar. And so this kind of ties along with the interest that the user inputs. So for this example, she liked simple meals, and then as well as doing CrossFit and yoga. And so this Explore page would basically greet her with other people and their posts and their journeys who share a similar interest with her. And then next, we will be going over the recipes tab, which Kevin will be going over.
So for the recipes, we decided to add a bunch of list categories to separate the recipes, and added a search bar to be able to filter that also. So some of the recipes that you can pick are gluten-free, low-carb, lactose-free, and keto. And for the user could actually upload these videos to save them in the library and to actually be able to watch them when they want to start preparing food. Same thing for fitness. We listed a bunch of workouts and various types so that the user could easily filter and search through them. And also the user could actually upload their own videos to be able to save them and load them and watch them whenever they want.
And then for the My Progress tab, we kind of wanted to also create a tab for this just to kind of have the user track their own progress as well as share it with their connections if they wish. So we kind of didn't include this option, but further developing the website, we definitely want to include a tab where we can have the user determine whether or not they want to share it with just their specific connections or keep it public. But this is kind of like an overview. So they would be inputting their specific measurements here, and then they would be greeted with a with this progress in graph or table format. So basically what we included right here was Jessica's weight progress and then her nutritional intake that she inputted. And yeah, so kind of going off of the questions that you asked about, like the Scrum documents. Similar to every other group, we kind of started off with dividing it based on back end, front end, but it kind of just fell down to once we created like the foundation of the website, like these different pages, we kind of moved towards dividing it to each page. So for example, Kevin had recipes and fitness. I had explore, some of profile, and Nurali had connections, some of explore and some of profile. And then as we were kind of working on the project, we kind of through communication also were able to determine what the strong points were for each member. So there were certain things that I didn't know how to do that maybe Kevin and Nurali knew how to do, and vice versa. And we kind of just went off of that and helped each other out. And then for the user testing as well, when we had done the user testing, it was more of just like our website wasn't like completely finished. It was more of just we had laid down the foundation of it. But the main thing that we got from that was just making sure that our website was really user friendly and easy to navigate. So yeah, that's our website.
Okay, great. I saw a few examples where JavaScript was used. Could you all talk a little bit, because I think the site's beautiful, and I just want to see a little bit more highlighting of where JavaScript was implemented for the functionality of the site.
So, oh, sorry. So a lot of the ones that, like, for example, like this loading bar and like how it loads, for me, I specifically like had to Google a lot, Google and YouTube kind of examples that had those types of codings, and I kind of just implemented them that way based on what I learned off of that. And then I had to kind of customize it to our website, basically. So it's kind of just like adding in the foundation of it and then adding in the JavaScript afterwards as like little sections in the page. That's kind of just what I did.
Yeah, I think that's the way to go. You kind of build the structure, and then the JavaScript is sort of the icing on the top. It helps make things.
Yeah, and I think doing Googlings and like looking at YouTube videos of how it like, of other examples really helped a lot too, because you kind of can like go off of those and customize it to your own needs.
Yeah, I think with code, more than any other subject matter, everything you need to know is out on the open internet. And I think that's really a valuable thing. So getting used to that process of figuring out what you want to do, you know, even if it's just a question that you don't have the answer to, and searching on the internet to find that answer can be very, very valuable. I was also interested in the data visualization. So that's, I think you're the first team that did a little bit of that. It looks like you used a plugin. Could you talk a little bit?
Yeah, so this one I actually got off of a different website, but it was basically like it had created this, but you input your own data. And then same thing with this bottom one. This was off of Google, I believe. I found a website where they had codings examples that you could use, and you basically input your own data. And that's kind of what I did for this one as well.
Okay.
Yeah. So kind of just had to alter the data that they had for their coding, but make it to where the colors matched and like all of that stuff.
All right. Does anyone have any questions for My Health? Well, I think it's a really slick looking site. I like the, I think it's unique. It's unique in a lot of ways, and yet there's a lot of consistency and ease of use. I could definitely see this being something that could, you know, I could use. So that's cool. And I think probably the next step would just to add a little bit more functionality, but I think this is a great prototype. If you all could each individually just talk a little bit about what you enjoyed about the process, what you found frustrating, and then is this something that you think you might carry through past the class?
I can go first. So what I enjoyed the most was kind of creating something so cool and so unique, and wanting to be a healthcare provider like in the future. I think this is a cool way to also help people. Like we always think, you know, and it's the most original way to help people, because this is something that, you know, people struggle with a lot, and there really isn't a platform to you know, advocate for weight loss or anything like that, and actually be in connection with, you know, loved ones and providers. And I loved like being able to, I don't know, be creative in a sense, because most classes don't allow us to do that. But another thing I struggled with was I couldn't get the images on for anything. I had to get Alvin to do all the images to attach them to my posts and stuff. So that was kind of difficult. And we had a couple of issues in the beginning with Code Sandbox, where we would do our work and then it would just delete even if we saved it. So we had to start over a couple of times. So that was pretty difficult.
I'll go next. I think kind of going off of what others said earlier, it was really nice seeing basically just text you're inputting into a website turn into something like that you see in other websites. Like I always compared this to our template and like all these colors and stuff to like other websites that you have, like for example like Instagram, like other social media platforms. Like it was kind of nice to see that like you through coding can create something like that you never would have really expected to. And like I've never taken a coding class before this, so it was a first experience, and that was really nice. But other than that, yeah, kind of like what Nirali mentioned as well, like we kind of just struggled with the website a little with like the saving. We also had some issues with if in the beginning, if one of us made a change, the other wouldn't really see it. We ended up figuring those little like those setbacks out, but it was kind of just frustrating at first.
Okay.
I would say it was an interesting project, but I felt like my skill level didn't let me do the things I wanted to do. So it was kind of like interesting in the sense that like I felt like I had to simultaneously realize that I'm still a beginner, but also that like if stuff I want to do, I have to keep working on it. And so it's always like just a sudden realization that you're still starting from the bottom, and that you still have to climb the mountain to get to where you are.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a very interesting final point to, I think, close on with the presentations. That skill level, I think there's definitely a lot to learn, and it's tough to build a website on only half a semester of training. But given all of that, I would say that I think you all did a very good job. I think certainly some sites look a little slicker than others, but some sites are a little bit more functional than others. And I think overall, everyone really showcased a lot of cool stuff, and a lot of great skills given the amount of training that you all received. So I'm glad that you were able to put what you learned into practice in creating these prototypes. And I hope that they inspire at least a fraction of you all to want to learn more, like Sapuni's doing with his prototype, to potentially be one of the innovators in the digital health world. And I think even if you're not building your own thing, having these skills, like I mentioned with my previous job, can be very valuable in either running projects or interacting with people who are doing sort of the IT side within healthcare. And I think whether you're a doctor, or you're working in a healthcare company, or you want to start your own thing, these will be skills that I think you'll probably lean back on, even if you don't end up making it a primary function of what you do. So I was very pleased to see what you all were able to produce. If you all could email me, whoever the Scrum Master is, if you could email me with the most updated code sandbox at the end of this class, then I'll dive in and do some final assessment before releasing grades. But I'm, like I said, very happy with where you all ended up on your prototypes. Any questions from me on how the projects went, or what's expected as you finalize the code for, I think, Wednesday at 5, when I'll go ahead and do the code review? Did anyone make any observations when they saw the other teams? I wanted to, last week I had you all present a little bit in 1 or 2 minutes what you'd all produced, because I wanted to inspire the other teams. But obviously a lot has happened between now and last week, and the presentations are a lot more thorough now. In viewing the presentations, did anyone make any observations about another team's work that you thought, oh man, that's cool, if only I knew how to do that? Were you inspired in any way by what other teams did?
I guess me personally, since I don't really know how to use Java, seeing Java just played out, I guess mine and other teams, like definitely showed like what can be done. And so I guess it was kind of cool just seeing what you could do once you get good.
Very cool. Anyone else? Okay, well, let's take a 10-minute break. Let's be back at 4:05. And then in the second half of the class, I'm going to talk a little bit more about backend code, how it all ties together, and then some next steps if you want to move forward with creating an app with backend. All right, so be back at 4:05.
Well, I had a question. So for ours, you talked about like the stories page and the Java getting it to work to the styling of the actually posting. Do you want me to work on that before we submit it on Wednesday?
I would say if you do that, it would probably could only help with final grade, but I would say that's definitely not a necessity. So up to you. If you want to, just send me an email and I can provide some guidance.
Okay.
Okay, it's 4:05. If you all could turn your monitors or your cameras back on, and then we'll get started. All right, Sifuni and Robin, are you back? All right, well, I'm going to get started. Oh, we lost someone. All right, well, I'll get started. Hopefully, whoever we lost is able to get back. So a little bit about back-end code. We didn't have enough time in just half a semester to really dive deep into back-end code, and I think JavaScript was probably enough, I think, to keep your hands full anyway. But I want to talk a little bit about how it works. And in actuality, even though back-end can sometimes seem a little bit more intimidating than front-end or front-end JavaScript, a lot of times it's easier because there's a lot more back-end languages, and some of them are built to just be easy to use and simple and almost lyrical in the way that they work. Python's a good example. I'll show you some Python example in a couple slides, but there's none of this semicolon stuff, brackets, things like that. It's much more readable. It almost reads like a language, like a spoken language, and that's really nice. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's become so popular among developers. But a little bit about how it works. So if you've got your browser on the left side, the server code inserts content into that browser. So remember when you were building HTML code, you were essentially specifying everything. Now, some of you might have written some JavaScript to change the text within an element or to alter something, but for the most part, your HTML was all of your content. When you implement backend code, you have a server which uses that backend code to query from a database that's separate from the browser, separate from everything else, and then uses the information in that database to fill the content. So if you were to look at how an Instagram or a Facebook works, they don't actually have all of your friends hard-coded into the HTML, but what they have is placeholders. And then the backend code fills those placeholders. Well, I gotta just let someone in who dropped. Okay. So you have the placeholders in HTML, and then the server, the backend code on the server will fill those placeholders with information from the database. So it might make a query to the database saying, hey, who are all the friends of Will? And then all of those friends would then be brought over to the server, basically in a list form, and then inserted into the browser. And then that's why you see in a certain column, who are all of your friends or what are all of your posts. So none of that is really in the HTML itself. It's just injected into the HTML using backend code. Any questions about that? I think it's a big leap in concept from where we've been with just browser code. So I want to be sure that I answer any questions about what the difference is. Would anyone like to volunteer based on what they just heard? Maybe repeat back how you interpret backend code differs from, say, your front-end code, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. I want to make sure I really hit home with this point because it's a big one.
Is it one is from the user side and one is from the developer side?
Exactly. So one is on the browser side, right, which the user uses, and then one is sort of on the server side, which is the developer. So that's the code you don't see. It's all the code that the developers at Facebook, Instagram, what have you, are using to manipulate data. And so then just to take that one step further, based on what I just said, based on this graphic right here, would anyone like to explain how that backend code then impacts what the user sees?
Isn't it like essentially taking like what you provide and then churning out based off of that from the database that they have what you want to see?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so just to emphasize the key difference, so the key difference is just that the server and the database are disconnected from the browser. So it's like a big warehouse of information. There can be gigabytes, terabytes of data, even more. I think petabytes is like the, whatever, 1,000 trillion bytes of data. Huge databases of information that would completely bog down a user's browser are now accessible and can just be injected based on, Sumita, what you were saying, user inputs. So what are user inputs? Let's say user inputs that they want to see their friends. Then that tells the server-side code in the middle, that's your backend code, to, hey, why don't you query the database and look for all the friends of this particular user. Right? And so that's the way in which what the user does on their browser can interface with all of that information on the database and then show the user only that information that is most interesting to them. So that's in a nutshell how the backend code interacts with the front-end code. So also within backend code are frameworks. And so I want to talk a little bit about frameworks, and I'm going to specifically draw out the Django framework in Python. It's one of the most popular frameworks out there. It's the one that I use for my programming. And I'll show you in hopefully a real sense that you all can identify with how that implements on the user screen. So when the user goes to a particular website, right, when they enter something into their URL, that information automatically gets picked up by the urls.py file. And this is within the Django framework. And then that urls.py is kind of like a switchboard. So if I go to facebook.com/friends, I don't think that's the right URL, but let's say that's the URL to view all of my friends. That's going to get picked up on the server side. It's going to say, oh, this user went to the Friends tab. Therefore, perform certain operations that will get that user friends. So the URLs is the switchboard. It's basically just saying, where on my backend code am I going to go that delivers that friends information? So it takes you to what's called a views. So the views.py contains the bulk of the backend code. So I might have different views.pys. I might have one for friends. I might have one for posts. I might have one for maybe my group pages. And so based on the URL that I go to, it's going to pick the right one. In this case, because I went to facebook.com/friends, it's going to find the friends views. And then it's going to have all kinds of code that are necessary to make that friends page work. So it might say, hey, figure out who Will's friends are, maybe figure out who his recently viewed friends are, figure out different information about maybe who has posted most recently. It does all of that code on the back end so that the information can be displayed to the user. Now within the views PI, it can talk with certain things. So if we go to what the user really sees, that's the templates. So the templates are your basic HTML. It's the HTML essentially that you all have already worked with. However, it's got these inputs for the views PI to inject information into those inputs. So it might say, hey, here are the inputs for friends, and they're really placeholders on your templates. And then the views will then inject whoever a given user's friends are into that template so that when you actually view it on the web page as the user on the browser all the way on the left of this graphic, you can see that list of friends. Now, you might have the question of, how do I actually get that list of friends? Well, that's done through models in this particular framework. So the views might make a query, and I'll show you what that looks like on a later slide. But that query will go through to the models, which is really the blueprint of the database. So the models might say, hey, I want to have a database that lists friends, and I want to show each friend's name, their picture, maybe their recent posts, or actually all their posts you're probably going to store into the database, who their friends are. I want all of that information to be stored in a database. And that's all architected through the models.py. And the models.py is really the part of the framework that is defining how we talk to the database. And then the database is actually a whole separate thing. It's not even part of the framework language. It's just another location that we're storing on. Usually somewhere in the cloud, right? Like Amazon Web Services will run your database for you. If you're a huge company like Facebook, you probably run the databases yourself. But there's a lot of big companies out there that still just use these services, like Amazon, Microsoft, and Google, I think are the three big ones that host databases on behalf of other companies. So just to summarize, you've got when the user goes to a given site within your website, it talks to the urls.py, which is kind of like your switchboard. That switchboard picks the views.py that's relevant based on what part of your website the user is on. And then that views.py does all of the heavy lifting. So it might say, okay, we're on the friends page, therefore we want to query all their friends. We also want to know who's been most active lately and all that. And it compiles all that information into variables that are then injected into the templates, HTML. So it makes it a lot more alive, right? If you remember when you were building your prototypes, a lot of that was hard coded. And if you think about, well, what if a new doctor happens to join my particular company, or not company, but my particular application, how does that update? Do I have to go into the HTML and change that immediately? No. What happens is when that new doctor, let's say we're talking about a new doctor from Inform.me, right? I think they had a list of doctors. If that new doctor signs up, that will then be triggered on the urls.py. They'll say, okay, they're on the doctor sign up form. And then on the views.py, it's going to take all the information that they inputted on, let's say, a form that says their name, where they work, and what their specialty is. And then the views.py will then talk to models and say, hey, new doctor joined, add them to the database. And so then that'll happen. And then when a patient later comes onto the site, they go to, let's say, the Find a Doctor webpage within your site. URLs will then go find the right code for any user that's on Find a Doctor. And then it's going to query the database, which now has this newly signed up doctor. And then it's going to get that information. So then it can be displayed onto the template. So that's in a nutshell how it works, right? You no longer have to change your HTML anytime a new update is made, but instead you have the backend code continuously adding to the database and retrieving information from that database to make the user experience much more live and much more dynamic. Any questions about that? Does that make sense? Could you all think, maybe does anyone want to talk to how if you had these capabilities that might impact your given prototype? If there'd be a healthy mind exercise to go through. Any volunteers?
I feel like this application would be super useful for making new profiles and then be able to basically link those profiles to its own little like calendar and then linking those calendars to other calendars. That would have really helped to push our prototype forward for sure.
Cool. So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, and I will help walk you through it. And obviously your team can help you as well. So walk me through maybe somebody adding an appointment and how that would interact with the database. And then when you retrieve that, what would be the end result?
I would think that, let's say you're trying to add an appointment.
And use this, use the framework too. So like, walk me through, how would that go through then the URLs, the views, the models?
So maybe the user can kind of click to their patients and then can go to that URLs.py to that specific patient probably.
Okay.
And go to views py and specifically get to that little option that says, I want to see their schedule or like their calendar.
Mm-hmm.
And then basically that views.py can retrieve all the important stuff about their calendar, such as like what days they're free, what appointments do they already have, and things like that, and then retrieve that information from the models.py and then spit it back out to the user, which is the doctor in this case. So then he can see, oh, okay, this is the patient's information of, what appointments they have, when they're free, and then maybe they can put in their own information into that and then throw it back into the database. So that way, maybe when a patient logs on or wants to see any new appointments they have, they can go through the same steps of like going to their profile and clicking like the specific views.py to retrieve that information back from the database and then spit it back out to them. So that's
yeah, great work. And I would say that, so you mentioned the spit it back out, which I thought was kind of interesting because I didn't highlight that. So let's say, like you said, a user or a patient, maybe makes a request for an appointment with a doctor. Now, the way that I explained it, they would go to the view or go to a URL to make a request that pulls out the right backend code that then when they make the request, it say pings the models, which then adds that request to the database, right? Hey, patient wants to see you at 10 a.m. tomorrow. Now, the way that I explained it, that would then go to the views or go into the models in the database so that when a doctor goes to view appointments, they will go to views for view appointments. That would then retrieve that information, which now has been newly supplemented with that patient's availability, and then go onto the template so that they would see it. So that's one way for it to work. But again, Derek, you mentioned that it would spit it out. We could bypass this altogether so that when the user does their part, or the patient ends up making the request and it modifies the database, the views could actually do something that goes beyond the template and just emails the doctor or sends a notification right away. So there's now suddenly things that you can do that have nothing to do with the browser. You can just have these notifications being sent so that the doctor knows in real time, hey, this patient wants to see you tomorrow at 10 a.m. So it can kind of work in both directions, right? You've added to the database so that shows up the next time the doctor wants to view their available patients. But then you can also do other stuff on the back end. You could send emails, send other sorts of notifications, any number of things that you could do on the back end to make sure that the doctor gets the information that they need. Okay, thanks, Derek. Anyone else want to go? I think the more examples that we have here, the more we'll really be able to hit home and I think make this clear for everyone. Because it's an out there concept, I think, how backend code works. And I would say 90, maybe even more, maybe 95+% of people have no idea how it works. So I think if you can walk away from this last lecture understanding it, I think that'll go a long ways towards you really having almost secret knowledge that most people don't know about. Okay, I'll move on then. So this, I just put a couple images here. So these frameworks, when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about Python. Python is the language, Django is the framework. So Python is basically all the code that goes within urls.py, views.py, models.py, and of course, py stands for Python. And then Django is just what types of files are you using? So if you see this URLs used models, you know that's Django. If you don't want to use Django, there's plenty of other frameworks that might be worded slightly different, but they all have a similar principle, which is that they try to figure out where the user is in the website, use that to do the right kind of code, and then communicate with the database through the models. And another thing I'd add, so the models aren't the database. The models do not have any information. They are more the framework or the blueprint of the database. So the models will tell you, I want to hold information for a given user that has their name, their profile picture, their likes, their about me, and their friends. That's what the models will tell you. But then that actual information of say, Will looks like this, has this profile picture, has these friends, and teaches at KGI, that sort of thing, that is all on the database. So that's actually separate from the Python language itself. And the Python language is just getting that information from the database using the structure created with the models.py. So any questions on backend framework? I'll show you a simplified example. So in this example, the Python code might look like this. And you can see right away that there's no semicolons. It's a lot cleaner than what you've got with JavaScript. So hopefully JavaScript didn't scare you all away from backend code, because it really is much uglier in general and a lot more picky in terms of what will cause an error than some of your more popular backend frameworks. The reason why I wanted to focus on JavaScript is because everybody needs to know it. So with Python code, you can really, I guess, you can really substitute a lot of need for JavaScript code just by using some of this cleaner Python language. But I don't think there's a site out there that doesn't use JavaScript code. So JavaScript is in some ways a necessary evil when it comes to building a web application. And it's very powerful. It's just ugly and tough to work with, as you all saw. So in this case, Python, you can see this render with, which is basically saying what template, what HTML template am I going to work with? And here we have profile.html. And let's say that this is our profile.html. So it's very similar to a lot of the HTML templates that you all created. I didn't put any CSS, no classes, none of that. They would normally be here, but I just wanted to show the very simple version. And so now you see here, if you all were doing your prototypes, and where you do have your prototypes, you would probably put, instead of profile name, something like Meredith Gray, right? So I saw in the one example, you had Meredith Gray as a doctor. But you had to write that in. You had to write each different doctor. You had to have each different link to their profile pic. Here, we're just putting a placeholder. So these double brackets are basically saying, hey, I want a variable that's called profile name and another one called profile pic. And then I want my backend code to tell me what those look like. And then on the your friends, I actually have a little bit of logic within my HTML that says for F and friends, so go through all of the friends in this given user and then list their name and their pic. So that way I can have someone's name and their picture, and then below that, a list of their friends with all of their friends' names and pictures. And I've done this in only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines of code. If we were doing it the way that you all did, because you had to for your prototypes, that would probably be, dozens of lines of code, because you have to code every single friend that they've got, their names, their profile pic. You're probably gonna want more information there too. So it's a much simpler way to write your front-end code. And then the work is all done on the back end. So here's an example. As I said, it renders with this template. So that's just telling it what template on HTML to display to the user. You define the name of the view. So I'm not showing it the URLs, that switchboard, but the URLs would basically say, hey, if someone's on facebook.com/friends, then find the view that's defined as friends, right? So in this case, if they're on myapp.com/profile, then the URLs would say, hey, for anyone who's on that URL, find the view called profile_view. So that's sort of how the URLs talks to the views, which I have exemplified right here. So in this case, we've defined the view and we've got one input, and that input is request. So request is a generic input that is used in the Django framework of Python that basically refers to who is the user. So if they're logged in, request is that user. So in this case, I'm saying profile name equals request.user.their name. So in this case, every request user has a name, they have a pic, they have more information as well. But here, I just want to retrieve their name and that user's picture, and then define them as the variable profile name and profile pic. And you can see that they get inserted here. So whoever's logged in, it'll find out their name. Let's say that name is Will. Pic, let's say it's a link to my pic. And then it will inject that into the HTML template. Now, we're also going to want to do a query. And so a query is basically a ping to the database. And they want to query, in this case, all of the friends of that user. So here, when I say user.objects.get, that's just a pre-programmed language to say, hey, talk to models.py, which will then talk to the database and get me all of the users that meet a certain criteria. So in this case, I want friends to be equal to all of the users within my database who have the attribute friends with equal to request user. And this is a simplified example. There, isn't always a friends with attribute. In this case, we're basically saying, I want to find all of the users within the database. In Facebook, this database is over 1 billion users. So go into that database and find all of them who have the attribute that they are friends with whoever the user is that's looking at the profile. And that's defined as request.user. So when that happens, it's going to query all of my Facebook friends, right? If what we're talking about is Facebook. And then finally, I just do this return. So the return is a dictionary that contains all of the variables that I want to then, as you can see the arrow pointing, inject into my HTML template. So profile name, that's simple. That just equals profile name. Profile pic equals profile pic, and then friends equals friends. So if I were to say name this profile dot name, or if I didn't even want to do this, I could also say profile name. Hold on. So on the bottom line, I could do profile_name equals request.user.name. So I wouldn't even have to do that line towards the top if I just did it that way. So this line at the very bottom is just telling us what are the variables that I'm going to insert into my HTML to the right. So as long as the orange words match what's in the brackets on the HTML, it's going to have the information that's necessary to inject that data into the user's browser in terms of what they see. So any questions about how that works? All right, so then I'll run through a little bit about how you go about creating a local server. I'm not going to tell you really how to do it in detail, but you notice that there's a lot of links on this slide, and there's going to be a lot of links on the next slide. So all of these blue underscored words are links to how to do these activities in further detail. So that way, for instance, Safuni, you mentioned that you are building your own app. If you want to figure out how to create a local server so that you could build that app somewhere outside of Code Sandbox, then you could follow these steps. So first is learn how to use the command consoles. So has anyone ever used either the Windows command prompt or the Mac terminal within their computer? Anyone want to volunteer what they've used it for?
So it was actually a little bit stupid. I tried at first using that to encode the images on the homepage for Inform Me in a bit64.
Oh, interesting.
But yeah, I ended up not doing that. But yeah, so I have used it for that. I've also used it to bring up a couple of the directories on my computer when it crashed at one point.
Cool. Anyone else? Do you use the command prompt or the terminal? I think, Zaid, your answer, especially your second answer, is really the main way in which people interface with this. So I think that leads to a lot of hate towards the command prompt or terminal. It's usually to fix something when something goes horribly wrong with your computer. I would say that having some level of basic familiarity and knowing a little bit more about how to code, I think should help with this, can go a long ways towards doing really powerful things with your computer. And it also enables you to fix your computers in ways, I'm sure you all have looked for things like, how do I make my computer faster? Like it's slowing down, or all my memory is being used up, and then you'll see an answer of how to fix it, but it involves using the command prompt, and then you're like, nope, not gonna mess with that. But if you have some familiarity, then it really can be empowering in terms of fixing things that are wrong with your computer or making your computer do really cool things. I mean, I was in the market for a car a couple of years ago, and I was able to use command prompt to have my computer every morning go online, look at car prices, and then save it into an Excel sheet. So things like that you can do through your command prompt and through a little bit of backend code. So I would encourage you to be familiar, especially if you're going to create a local server. There's really no way around it. You need to use these command prompts and terminals. Step 2 is installing Python 3. Just a pretty simple step-by-step. Macs, I know, come with Python, but I don't think PCs do. So if you've got a Mac, just find out what Python you have, and I think that's included in the link. If you've got a PC, simply download it. I don't think it takes up that much memory on your computer. And then finally, use a package manager to install a couple things. And I'll just run through what they are. So virtual env, also known as virtual environment, is basically a way for you to, if you remember when you were building your Code Sandbox prototypes, some of you ended up installing dependencies, right? These were some JavaScript packages that help you do things like bring up the calendar or write comments on your web page. So virtual env is a way for you to store your dependencies that you require for your given website that you're building. The reason you want to do this is, I guess there's two reasons. One is, for the most part, what you're downloading is not relevant to anything else you're doing on your computer. So it's nice to have them in this bucket within the computer so your computer doesn't get confused. The other thing is, as you start building your web page out, you might find that you want to make different versions, or you might find that you are making multiple different applications. In that case, having this virtual env to divide all of the packages that you've got for, let's say, your one application, version 1, versus the version 2 after you do some sort of major upgrade and you don't want to do the upgrade and risk crashing everything that you built before. Putting all your packages in one bucket is very helpful and very important. So it's just something you got to do before you create your local server. And then within that virtual environment, you start to install things like Django. It's really the only one you need. But then I think when you click that Django link, they'll tell you more packages that are pretty good to have as you're starting up your web application. And then lastly, you need to install a SQL database. So I recommend Postgres. I think it's the easiest to use, and it's one of the most well adopted of all the databases, but you're basically looking for SQL. So SQL is really the most commonly by far used type of database for most web applications. So you'll want to download that onto your computer. Next, download a text editor. So there's a couple options here. I would recommend starting with something like Sublime Text, which is a very simple text editor. It's basically like Notepad. Have you all used Notepad on your computer just to take simple notes? So it's super simple, but I would recommend going beyond Notepad to something like Sublime Text because they add a lot of helpers. So if you noticed when you were typing into Code Sandbox, it would recognize certain things like what is a div versus what is your actual content, you know, what is a function, and it would color them differently. That's, to be honest, the main function of a text editor is to color your text in smart ways. And that helps you as you're coding. Because if you try to code without any sort of color coding, it's really hard. And it just makes your eyes glaze over. So you'll need to download something for your local computer. And then if you click the next link, the Start Django project, it just walks you through all the steps you need to go to. And then on the command prompt, once you finish all these steps, you're going to have something called manage py. And if you just type that command, then you started your server and it's now working. And if you've got code within that server, all you got to do is go to that link on your browser. It's that same link on everyone's browser. This is to their local server, and it'll show up. So it's kind of cool. It'll be a website that only you can see. And then that would be the main vehicle through which you would work as you build out your web application. Any questions about how you go about creating a local server? I found that when I first did this, the hardest thing was just knowing where to go. So I hope that these 2 slides help you figure out where to go. And then once you're there, the links will really be pretty step-by-step, pretty easy to follow to get you to actually spinning up a local server and working on a new web application. So the next steps, if you're interested in learning more about backend code, is learn Python. So Codecademy, which you're all familiar with, and is really my preferred tutorial type of web application. They have a free version for Python 2, but they make you pay for Python 3. Now, if you want to pay, Python 3 is really what you should be using for your new application. But I will say that the differences are very, very subtle. So if you go through the entire course on Python 2, there's really only a handful of things that you really need to understand are different about Python 3. So I would encourage you to still do the Codecademy, even though it's an outdated version, just to learn the basics of how to use Python to create applications. Python itself, which is an open source community, also offers a tutorial of how to use Python 3. It's just less interactive, less user-friendly, but it still is useful. And then there's another that's sort of somewhere in between. It's more interactive, but not quite as nice of an interface as Codecademy, called learnpython.org. So I'd encourage you to check those 3 out if you're interested in understanding a little bit more about how backend code works in the context of building a web application. Because I know some of you know how to use Python or at least R for data analysis. It's really a different ballgame when it comes to how do we query databases to inject information into web pages. Knowing how to use it for data analysis is definitely useful because you know how for loops work, you know how if statements work and all of that. But I'd encourage you to learn a little bit more using these links if you want to use backend code to build a web application. And then finally, to understand Django a little bit more, which is what I just went over, this Django project is very, very thorough. It's made by the people who created Django. I'd highly recommend it. It's a little bit, it's not as nice as something like Code Academy, but it's pretty much everything you need to know. And you don't really need to fully understand Django up front. You just need to know the basics. And then as you have questions, you'll learn either through Googling or by looking through the documentation from djangoproject.com. Okay, so that's all I've got on backend code, I think, yes. And then after that, I'm gonna go through a little bit of regulatory, patient privacy, HIPAA, and then that will conclude the class. I'll open it up for a little bit of Q&A. I also wanna do a course feedback poll from you all to help me develop next year's class. But before I move on to regulatory, any questions about code? Because this is pretty much it on code related information.
I have a question.
Yes.
So through all this, you talked about like Python and things like related to Python. Is there ever like websites and stuff written in like C or a different, or is it always Python as the backend?
Absolutely. Great question. There's dozens of languages that are on sites that you use on a daily basis. So Facebook is not written in Python, it's written in PHP. That's the only example that I really know off the top of my head, but I know that there's a lot of languages written in C, a lot of languages written in C++, which is different from C, a lot of languages written in Java. So I'd encourage you to, if you're curious, Stack Overflow, I'm sure a lot of you use as you're building your prototypes. They do an annual survey of developers to figure out who's using what. And so you can get a sense for what are the most popular languages. And I think they even dive into a little bit about what types of people use different languages. There are differences. Some languages are certainly more useful for certain applications than others, but a lot of it's personality, because I think Python and PHP really have the same capabilities. PHP, I think, is more for the super technical programmer type because it's an uglier language. It's got, you know, more like semicolons, stuff like that. It's less readable, but I think people love it because ultimately it's faster if it's done correctly. It's just less user-friendly. Python is definitely the most trendy of the languages, and it's the one that I know the best. That's why I focused on it a little bit in this lecture. Some people argue that it's not as fast, but at the same time, huge websites like Yelp use Python, so it's fast enough for, you know, applications that have hundreds of millions of users. So a lot of it's personality. It's what do you like the most? What's your style? Do you want something that reads more like a sentence, or do you want something that's maybe a little bit more numeric or hard-coded looking, but efficient? Great question. But I will say, just to emphasize, the summary is check out those Stack Overflow surveys. I think they have a lot of information, not only about languages to use, but also JavaScript libraries that are popular, text editors. So I mentioned that a little bit. Sublime Text was the one that I mentioned, but also Visual Studio Code. I actually used to use Sublime Text. Then I read this Stack Overflow survey, and it talked about how Visual Studio Code is really picking up steam, and it's more feature rich. So I switched over because of the Stack Overflow survey. So I'd encourage you all to check that out if you're curious about what else is out there. Any other questions about code? All right, well, I wanted to build this part of the lecture just so that you've got the basic information to know what backend code is, how it interacts with what you all have already built with your prototypes. Obviously, I think as you can see now, there's just no way to fit backend code in its full force into this half semester class. But if you're interested, I hope that I provided enough information for you all to explore further. Okay, so a little bit about HIPAA, because I think this is what's most important for you to know from a regulatory standpoint. If you were to say, take the prototypes that you built and turn them into actual business ideas or actual things that work and hold patient information. So this passed in 1996, and it pertains to what are called covered entities. So covered entities are really providers that are engaged in some sort of transactions with health information. And most specifically, it's relevant to protected health information. So HIPAA is really a bunch of requirements of what type of security measures you need to have in place if you are a covered entity that deals with protected health information. Now, I've got the definition here, but would anyone like to volunteer what their impression of health information is? Does anyone think they have an idea of what PHI is?
Be like, oh, go for it, Derek.
No, go ahead, Kevin.
Oh, would it be like pre-existing conditions?
That would be included among PHI, for sure. And Derek?
I was gonna say is, I guess, any information that could be tied to a specific person. So I was thinking like, you know how they do like surveys of how many people in the US have diabetes.
Mm-hmm.
That information is okay to display to the public, but none of those people with diabetes are given names or are tied to a certain person. That's how I interpret it. It's like any information that I guess you can track back onto a specific individual is considered, I guess, private information in that case. But
yep, yeah, for sure. Anyone else?
And then if I could kind of add on to that. So in addition to like health status, kind of like what Derek was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So anything that would relate to how healthcare was provided to them or how they paid for it as well.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
kind of essentially, like he was saying, anything that could be traced back to an individual to identify them, any one of those three things essentially could be considered PHI.
Yep. Anyone else? I think that pretty much covers it. So I like the three different perspectives I got there. So from Kevin, it's really talking about pre-existing conditions, which is of course a hot button word nowadays, right? We talk about how someone's pre-existing condition can really get in the way of them either getting insurance, health insurance, or also just getting a job, right? If every employer knew that you were diabetic, that might impact your job prospects because they might think, oh, well, you know, this person might be a liability if they were to pass out of, you know, blood sugar issues. We might have to make accommodations. That's why it's important that we keep their PHI private and we make sure that no one can get to it and that it's not public information. And then Derek really emphasized the fact that, well, it's mostly important if we can tie it to the person. And that's a very important criteria of, well, health information on its own. If I just have a list that says diabetes, heart attack in 2005, you know, brain tumor, that's not really anything that needs to be protected if it's de-identified. But if somehow we can tie that to an individual, whether it's through their address and social security number or their name or their contact information of any sort, they have a whole list of what qualifies as identifiable. Then it suddenly becomes important PHI that must be protected. And then Zaid also talked about how maybe it's not just their health information, but also sort of how they dealt with it, or, you know, doctors they've seen, things like that. Just the act of seeing a doctor. If I can figure out all the people who saw Dr. So-and-so for psychological issues, then that could be used against them in some way. So it's important that we keep that information strictly confidential and protected from people who might use it to do harm. Okay, so that's what HIPAA established, basically, is we must protect public protected health information, PHI, and really pertaining to covered entities who are, for the most part, when this was implemented, your insurance providers, your hospitals, and other sort of clearinghouses, people who hold prescription information, pharmacies. Then high tech came along. So high tech was implemented with Obamacare. And a big part of high tech was the implementation of electronic health records. But another component of it is the acknowledgement of the existence of business associates. So business associates are people who provide services to these covered entities that involve access to PHI. So, you know, once Obamacare came along, the internet had really taken over. If you think about the difference between 2009 and 1996, a lot had changed. And so they recognized the need to have some sort of regulation that deals with people who pull data from these covered entities. So people who analyze data for hospitals, turn that into clinical decision support, people who pull information from, say, insurance plans to use that to improve their processes. Basically, a lot of the people that I went over in the first two lectures, remember we talked about digital health solutions for patients, payers, providers, and producers, a lot of those ended up falling under the category of business associates. So now all of a sudden, it's not just your hospitals and health plan providers that have PHI. So they recognize the need for these business associates to enter into agreements that help prevent disclosure of PHI and require implementation of security control. And in the next few slides, I'll talk a little bit about what those controls are. So technical requirements. There are actually three categories of controls. There's technical requirements, physical requirements, and then administrative requirements. I'm not going to go over the physical and administrative. They're not really relevant for you right now, but it's things like, you know, make sure that multiple people don't use the same username and password, make sure that your databases are in secure locations, things like that. I want to talk about technical requirements because these are the things that will be important for you if you were to, say, pursue your apps for mass consumption. So actually, before I bring those up, let me go back a little bit. Some of the criteria are access control. So making sure that you really have secure username and password. And we're not just talking about allowing people to make their password 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like really making sure that they have difficult to hack passwords. Even in some cases, multi-layer authentication, things like that. Audit control. So making sure that we can see how the database has been changed over history so that if there's evidence of a hack or if anything's happened, you've got the information so that it's not lost to you. Integrity, so making sure that any alterations of PHI data are from people who are authorized to do so. So hackers can't go in and make changes on their own. And then also just restrictive access. So not only who can modify data, but who can just view data. So kind of like in Google Docs, you can specify who's able to view, who's able to comment, who's able to edit some of the documents that you might share with someone. Similar, but in a much more encrypted way with HIPAA-related web applications. And then speaking of encrypted, so transmission security. So if you are to send data from one computer to another, that must be done in an encrypted way. Because a lot of the ways that hackers get that information is as you're, say, sending an email from one person to another, they might steal that or spy on it somehow. So that needs to be encrypted so that they can't see what that information is. So encryption is really the #1 aspect of HIPAA compliance. You need to make sure that not only as the data is sitting there in your database, but also as you're sending it or modifying it, that it's all encrypted so that hackers can't get at it. And by the way, this is a requirement, but it is not, even among well-known hospitals, there are problems with lack of compliance. So this is really an area in which there's still a lot of room for the improvement, even among well-established players in the industry. Authentication. So you all played with this a little bit, right? Having login systems, but having really robust login systems so that you're authenticating the right people. People aren't sharing passwords, and people can't hack passwords because they're easy to hack. Auto log off. So making sure that someone can't just log in and then they're logged in forever, so that someone could maybe walk up to their computer while they're at lunch and then access everybody's PHI. Audit logs. This is really important because if breaches were to happen or if issues were to happen with the system, you really need to know at any given time what's happened. The audit logs are kind of like your security cameras within the database. So every time an edit has been made, when did it happen, who made the edit, and what was the edit. That way you can go back through the logs if something goes wrong and figure out what exactly happened, as you would with the security camera. Firewalls, so just traditional ways of keeping hackers out of your web application, and then backups, so that if there's a crash, all of your patients don't suddenly lose all their data, and suddenly no one knows how to treat them because they're reliant on your database, on your web app, and everything crashed. So making sure you have backups to make sure that if there's a crash, you only lose the last hour of data rather than all the data that you ever created. Okay? Any questions about HIPAA or what the requirements are? Okay, just a brief thing on encryption. So this is what I use for encryption. You can encrypt yourself, but it's really much more advisable. You know, one way in which the IT industry has evolved over the last, not even 10 years, I would say somewhere between 5 to 10 years, is the existence of things like Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud. They do all the hard stuff for you. And especially when it comes to encryption, security, unless you're a security expert, right, someone who's been training for years in the field, it's better to just do what they've got created for you. That way you can make sure that you don't have any holes, you have their entire team backing you up. And here's an example where really with just one click of the button and opening of the wallet, you're able to enable AWS to encrypt all of your information. And I joke opening of the wallet, but I think it's $1 a month if you just got a small app. And then as your app gets much bigger, it becomes more expensive, but as you become much bigger, you also have a bigger budget to deal with these sort of things. So sort of across the board, you know, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, DigitalOcean, all the different players that are around there, they make things as free as possible for people who are just getting started, because they know that once they've got you and your business is a success and you want to stay with them because you don't want to change things up, you don't want to mess with what works, that suddenly the bills can start getting higher. So they've got, you know, companies like Yelp out there paying them millions of dollars a month. But when they were startups, they were paying next to nothing. Okay? So encryption can be done through third-party services. It's really the bottom line from this slide. Okay, a little bit about FDA regulation, because this is really new. 21st Century Cures Act was passed in 2016, and they provided guidance on what is regulated as a medical device versus what is just a digital tool that's not subject to FDA oversight. And this was passed in 2016, but it really wasn't until last year that the FDA finally sent out the guidance of what they are going to regulate and what they're not, based on their interpretation of the new legislation. So what they said was that any clinical decision support software, any mobile apps, any digital tools are not subject to FDA oversight. And this was huge because people really didn't know up until last year whether the FDA was going to say, hey, you know what, you've built this app to help doctors diagnose things. You're going to have to take out a 510K or PMA to make sure that this thing works properly. Now they've said, we're going to be hands off. We're going to allow you to build what you want and then just work with providers to make sure it's doing the right stuff. So for digital decision or clinical decision support software, mobile apps, digital tools, FDA is now very hands-off. Things that are still subject to FDA oversight are wellness hardware. So an example, it might be like a smart scale for people with diabetes to look for blisters in their feet, which is a big issue with late-stage diabetes. That's still regulated by the FDA as a medical device. Also, any software that really manipulates health data, right? So if it's just a different way of viewing the data, there's no problem. But if it's doing some sort of manipulation that's really changing the game in terms of a diagnosis or maybe creating a new scan, let's say, that is still what the FDA would consider a device that needs to go through their regulation. This really freed up the development of digital health apps. So as I mentioned at the very beginning, we're entering into a golden age for digital health. And that's pretty cool. And so I think having this background will really enable you to grab the bull by the horn, so to speak, and become a part of this transformation in digital health. So what's next? A few of the areas that I'm personally most excited about is telemedicine is huge. We've been talking about telemedicine for the last 20, 30 years. But it really took pandemic to remove a lot of the barriers to telemedicine. So expect even after the pandemic runs its course for telemedicine to really be here to stay. And it's going to change a lot of what we do and how we do it, right? I mean, I'd say I'm guilty of being someone that didn't go to the doctor that often, and telemedicine really would have helped with that. So expect people to be able to see their doctor more often and have those regular checkups because now they don't have to go to the hospital. And suddenly it becomes a lot cheaper because you're not paying for all the support that goes with a hospital visit. Instead, you're just logging onto your phone, talking to the doctor for 15 minutes, telling your doctor what about a new mole or whatever concerns you, getting the right referral, and just getting more preventative care because of the use of telemedicine. Blockchain for patient records, that's still early, but there's a lot of cool stuff going on there. The sharing, I probably should have called this sharing of patient records or ownership of patient records because it even goes beyond blockchain, but just ways to simplify how patient information gets passed from entity to entity so that if I'm getting treated at one hospital and then I have to transfer to another one, they don't have to start from scratch, which, believe it or not, that's the current state. So figuring out ways to really add more portability to patient records. I think there's a lot of exciting movement going on there. AI for population health monitoring. So there's just so much data out there that it's impossible to know what are the drivers of good health, what are the drivers of bad health. And implementing some level of AI, which this is really what AI is built for, is taking obscene amounts of data that no human could possibly process and then trying to make some sense of it, at least to give us leads on what could be the areas where the least amount of work could have the most amount of impact on people's lives. I think there's a lot of potential there and a lot of cool stuff being done there as well. Real world evidence. So Right now, we have this concept of clinical trials to figure out what works, what doesn't, what gets approved. And they'll probably always be necessary to some extent. But I think a world in which we really have a handle on how a drug, how a device, how a treatment method is working in real life, and being able to use that to improve treatment around the world, I think there's a lot of potential because let's be honest, the real population looks nothing like your purified clinical trial patient populations. So being able to see how a drug works in practice can really lead to much better health outcomes in treatment. And then also just better, I guess, better best practices within health communities, right? Figuring out who's doing it right, rewarding them, incentivizing others to do it like them, I think could really improve our overall healthcare. And then last but not least, digital health therapies. So Livongo is a really cool company out there that's created a digital health app for diabetes that's been FDA approved, and their uptake has been crazy. I mean, they've really beat all their odds in terms of revenue, or all their predictions in terms of revenue, in terms of patient uptake, in terms of outcomes. So that'd be a company that I encourage you all to look at. But digital health therapies as a concept in general, I think there's a lot of promise there. And I'm excited to see what happens next in that field.